Force on Force features the largest and strongest outdoor military organization in the country. These are the men and women who make it possible to enjoy the freedom to hunt and fish. It is with great pride that we bring you Force on Force podcast, coming to you from the Force on Force Talk.
Hey, welcome to the Force on Force podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Dalrymple. We're here in the Force on Force Talk, and we've been a couple weeks off and getting a lot of stuff done, and we got a lot of things going on this time of year. And, you know, our last show was pretty exciting. We got to talk about the Elite Series on the Paspatank, and it was a cool event. I think we pretty much hit the nail on the head. A lot of time I spent at Bragg going and fishing that area, and me and Hal Abshire kind of got to talk about it. But this week, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the Kentucky Derby at the end, and you guys kind of know my link to that, and we're going to kind of tease it, and I'll give you a little bit of insight at the end of this. But when you say, why would we talk about the Kentucky Derby? Below a hint, it has a huge connection with bass fishing. Everybody that's followed bass fishing through the years knows a guy by the name of Kevin Worth on the Elite Series. You know, he was a jockey in the 1981 Kentucky Derby and on the Mythical Ruler. And so there's a little bit of story. It deals with fishing currently with me and the Kentucky Derby. But my guest today is none other than the famous Wade Middleton from Careco TV and a whole list of things from Americana Outdoors to Yamaha Whitetail Diaries. How you doing, Wade Middleton?
I'm doing good, and I think famous is a stretch. My mom might think I am, except when I didn't clean my room as a kid, but I appreciate the accolade and the calling out.
Well, I was pulling up your stuff on LinkedIn and just trying to get a whole list of like everything. Wade has a huge connection with me over the years. We're going to talk. One reason I want to have Wade on this show today is Wade is part of a very special event, you know, the Collegiate Bass Fishing Championship, and it's the 20-year anniversary, and everybody knows that that's one of my favorite events to go do with the West Point. Not going to get to go do it this year because of my son's graduating high school, and so it's the same day as that, but we're going to talk a little bit about that. But what I want to kind of start with, Wade, is when you read your thing, it says previously served with distinction in the U.S. Air Force. And I don't think a lot of people know that. I know that, you know, without having to read it, but I don't think a lot of people know that about you, do they?
No, I mean, I wouldn't be where I am if I wouldn't have served in the military. There's no doubt about it. You know, I grew up in a small town and went off to a small college, and I was addicted to hunting and fishing. And you know, but my family, a lot of my dad, my uncles, they'd all had a military background. So the history was there. And literally just randomly one day, I walked down to the recruiter and signed up. And I look back on it now, and man, I'm so glad that I did. It made such an impact. I learned so many things. I traveled the world. And like I say, I wouldn't be where I'm at right now if it wouldn't have been for that experience and you know, the opportunities that the Air Force provided me.
Yeah, I think that's, you come in so many contacts in life, and I think a lot of successful people I've been privileged of meeting, there's some version of how serving our country has impacted them that led them to be a successful person in some industry, field, business, you name it. And you're just one of many that I can think of out there. And yours is in the outdoor industry, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, I learned the discipline. I learned the teamwork. I learned how to see the world through different eyes. And man, I mean, it was just a great experience for a, 21-year-old kid that had grown up in southern Oklahoma and really hadn't been out of much of that country. And the next thing I knew, I was in Greece and the Middle East and Washington, D.C., and then thankfully ended up in San Antonio, where I was able to, get out and chase my dreams of doing what I do now.
Yeah, I think that's cool. I mean, so what I think most people don't realize is you talk about your military career, and we've talked about a little bit of, I mean, from the stuff you do in the media to the number of shows that you're on or host or whatever, but I don't think people kind of know that. I'd really call you, I don't know that it's, we can't say it started with you, but I really would say you're kind of the patriarch of college fishing. That's the way I look at it, And
And I've heard that. Yeah, I've heard that before. And college fishing actually existed before we, threw the gas on the fire. I think that, the Big Ten had what they call the mental bucket, and it was kind of a small gathering between a few schools, and they would buddy up with boat owners, and they'd go fish, and it actually created several people that I've, like Chris Sprangers that, has been involved in the industry, and he was key at Cabela's. And when we started our big launch, Matt Rayner, who worked at Ranger Bass Pro, and now he's with Texas Boats, and Danny Blanford, who, kind of runs the Anglers Chan program, helped a lot with our college deal. There's several guys that fished all that stuff back in the day. But it was, it was a small regional deal at the time. And when we kind of partnered up with Ranger and Cabela's and Fox College Sports, it was to take it to another level. And man, none of us could have ever dreamed what it would have done when we threw that big event down on Lake Louisville.
Yeah, I think 2005 was the first event that happened there in Louisville.
Yep.
And
Yep.
Lake Louisville, and for me, I'm a senior first lieutenant at the Fort Bragg, North Carolina, 82nd Airborne Division. So I can remember looking at that, thinking, watching it on TV and seeing it and thinking, man, that's a cool deal. Wishing they had that back when I was in college. Thinking how cool a piece that is, and as we, this is going to be the 20th year to have the championship. Did you ever think it would go 20 years?
Oh, no. I mean, back then I was just hoping that all the kids didn't end up in the bar, because I didn't know what was going to show up. We created it, and the mindset was, a lot of the leaders in the industry at the time that I still look up to, I'd go to meetings, and it was always about, what are we going to do to get the next generation fishing? There wasn't what exists now. There wasn't a high school and a junior high road that led to college that, allow these kids to come out now and be dominant on the tour. There was nothing. You go to a boat ramp, you didn't see a bass boat unloading, going fishing on a Saturday afternoon. It was non-existent. And so it was spawned out of the need to grow the sport at the time. And thankfully we had such great partners already through our other ties at Careco, but that's what spawned it. And to look at that, it could grow to this, and 3 major college trails and 60 plus events that are done by colleges and other people across the nation, and then spawn high school 10 years ago, and look at the trails that, and the tracks that kids like the Easton Fothergills who just won the Classic, for instance, and how they've progressed through this. Nobody in their wildest dreams could have predicted that.
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. I mean, I guess, you kind of you had a vision of what it was going to be, but I go back to you talk about like your military service. Did not so much a vision, but I guess my desire to want to work with the younger generation. I know we talk about want to grow the sport of fishing. People talk about it all the time. It's always that struggle because we see less fishing and hunting license being bought every year. But I always say my desire to want to work is that mentality that was kind of taught to me, beat into me, to say the least, when I was in the military, about always coach, teach, and mentor the younger generation, the guys that were coming in. Did that, maybe you didn't know at the time, but you kind of, that desire come from some of that?
I did very well could have. I knew I just wanted to create an opportunity. At that time I was, new to the TV world. I'd been doing TV shows for maybe 5 or 6, 7 years at that point. I was still fishing a lot of tournaments, and I knew what it was to finish last as well as to win. And when we built the whole deal, I had a vision of, I wanted every kid, because in my mind, every kid at that age is broke and they don't have 2 nickels to rub together. And I wanted to feed them and, take care of them, and let the kid, if you came all the way from Kentucky and didn't catch a bass, that you drove home and felt it was worth your time. And thankfully my team at the time, they all kind of bought into that. And it's still the same mindset, 20 years later, for us, at least as a group. It's to create those opportunities. And honestly, I love seeing all the touring pros names that have come through, but I'm just as proud as all the ones that would have taken positions in this industry. I mean, some of them now sign our contracts for the college fishing. Some of them are now people that we work with, and they're in marketing places. And I think, and that's something none of us expected, but it just created a lot of opportunities. And that does come from the military. When we're trainers, when we're E3s, E4s, and we got an E1 or E2 coming in my case, it was our job to teach them, even if it was just the littlest thing of cleaning something, to do it the right way. So it was prepared to work. It's sharing that intel. And, we spent a lot of time, you saw it at some of the persons, we fixed as many broken boats as we did anything just to keep people on the water.
Yeah. And that's why always the reason I loved working with the West Point guys is part of it. I look at it as, to me, it's a teaching moment, right? It's a classroom environment that's outside the classroom. I always say this, man, they're going to learn more from that event than they ever will sitting in a classroom at West Point.
Mm-hmm.
I say this all the time. I mean, whether you're load planning a gun truck, a tank, a helicopter, or a bass boat, it's all the same, right?
100%.
And
gotta
so
be prepared.
you got to be prepared. And so in a non-threatening environment, how many times do you get to sit down with a retired lieutenant colonel and a retired sergeant major and pick their brain about something you love to do, fishing, and relate it to a military operation? And so I look at it as it's a classroom outside the classroom. So you brought it up about the people that you've impacted, but it's not just the people that work in it, but do you ever think about the people that are better husbands and fathers and things like that, just because of who've come through the event over the last 20 years, the whole series?
I do now, because when we go to the classic and I'm walking around, I see the guys that are, 10, 15 years out of it that come up to me and talk about their past events, and they've got a stroller. And their wives will talk about, we had a kid get thrown out of his boat. I say kid, he was, I call them kids, even though they're all 21 or 22, and, got thrown out of a boat. And his wife talks about to me every time I see him at an event now, how he is so much safer, because we came up and talked to him and, made sure he's okay first, but talked about safety. But I don't think any of us, when you included in the past, when you bring these kids from West Point, man, I mean, they are bright-eyed and they're going to their first duty stations, and it's a different deal. None of us realize how big the impact just a minute or two of our time for those types of activities and those types of events, how important it is. And we just don't. That's why at the championship, I always wander off by myself for 4 or 5 minutes at takeoff, and I just watch them run out. I get more goosebumps in that 5 minutes than everything else I do all year long. And I get to do some pretty cool things, but that moment, watching them all go out, I can't explain how we got there, but we did. And it's just a special time. And we don't know what each one of those 400 kids at that championship, we don't know what they're going to do, but we've created an opportunity for them to be immersed in the outdoors. And, for your kids that come from West Point, we don't, their next duty station, there's no telling what they're going to encounter. So it's all of those opportunities.
Yeah, I always tell the story about 2 years ago, man. I got a brand new boat, man. It's got 7 hours on it, and I remember giving it to him, and him being all bright-eyed, and you've seen that look before many times, almost overwhelmed look. And I remember asking him, I said, hey, what are you going to do for the Army? And he said, well, I'm going to fly helicopters. So I said, man, I said, let me put this into perspective for you. I said, we're going to give you a $10 million airframe, right? And we're going to put you into combat and make you a platoon leader with about 4 or 5 other of these $10 million airframes. I ain't worried about this bass boat. That's why I pay insurance for it, right?
That's right.
And I said, this is a time for you to learn how to deal with that feeling before you get into that $10 million airframe when you're downrange.
Yep.
And so that's, you never know when that impact is going to be. And it's just kind of a cool deal. I think just along the way, I think seeing that it's been going on for 20 years, I find it kind of interesting, like here lately, like with all everybody's talk about like, you know, safety and everything that's kind of happened in the fishing world. I don't really think it's coming from the younger generation as much. It's just because if it had, I think we would have seen it over the last 20 years with everything that we've done with college fishing, you know?
Yeah, and it could happen at any minute.
Right.
We all know taking our eyes off for
Yeah.
1 second anything can happen and stuff. And these accidents that have happened recently, I mean, they're tragic.
They
hurt
are.
everybody in our industry's stomach, but that's my biggest fears when I send them out watching that weather.
Yeah.
How's it going to be? What can they do? And but if when you walk out your door to go to work, you're at risk. And so, but when you go fishing, you should never have a tragedy happen.
No.
You're out on a fun thing, and that's the hardest thing that hits me. A guy got up, went fishing, and we're hoping for something good. And the most recent accident at MLF is just it's such a sad thing. They were out having a good time and enjoying life, and none of those things should have happened, but they did.
Yeah.
And there's nothing we can do to bring that back.
I just bring that up because I think like our natural instinct is to jump to like, oh, well, we have so many high school and college. I think that's the wrong answer because we've been doing it for quite some time now. And it's just accidents are horrible as they are. It's back to that talk about we've been in the military, right? Probably the most, I'll share this story with you, Wade, and you'll understand this. When the Top Gun 2 Maverick came out, the movie, I remember taking my wife's oldest daughter to see it. And I remember walking out of that movie, right? And she asked me, she said, is training really that dangerous? And I said, yes, sometimes training is more dangerous than what we actually do in combat.
Yeah. And that's true.
And so we don't ever want to see tragedy happen, but sometimes some things are just unavoidable out there. And I think that you guys done such a good job of building quality and teaching that I think that's why we have such good deals for the last 20 years. I think that you guys don't get enough credit when it comes to this kind of stuff. I think that if it hadn't been for guys like you that have built such an awesome platform to put together, teach the younger generation the correct way to do things, how to operate boats safely. I think that you guys have done an awesome job. And I don't think you guys get enough credit for that, and that's the only reason I bring that up, that I think that you guys really deserve being kind of influential looking 20 years ago, we talked a little bit before this podcast, how everything kind of changes and you kind of could see, I don't know if you knew, but see how things were changing and the number of things that probably have been prevented over the years just because of the Collegiate Bass Fishing Championship series being so inspirational. You don't really even know that right now because you guys have been so inspiring to do the right thing with these kids along the way. I think it's pretty cool with that,
We appreciate it, and we've DQ'd a lot of them.
Yeah.
For, it's if I see them coming in too hot into a no wake zone, there's going to be a lesson learned, a lot of times the hard way. Putting that life jacket on, make sure that kill switch is turned on, and if the weather's bad and we need to do something a little different, delay, go to a trailering event. I mean, those are important things, and we can't stress them enough, and we preach it to them. We talk about it. You put it in their ear only to hope that little voice, when something's going on out there, makes them remember to do those things when we're not watching. And I think that's important. And sometimes they may look at the tournament directors or the staff as, man, that's just a grumpy old person. It's no, we go home to your family and your class and grow up to be influential down the road. And that's why we tell you to, you can't do those things. And all the organizations, BASS, Major League Fishing, all the groups on down the line, they all have the same mindset too. And I think that's one of the cool collective things about our industry.
Yeah, it is. I think that's really, really cool. And I know that, I've been influenced by what you guys have done. I got to share kind of in the 20-year history. You guys had me on your podcast back last August to talk. For me, I was, I could get to watch some of the stuff while I was deployed to Afghanistan in my first deployment, and I thought, man, if I ever get a chance to go back to grad school.
And you did.
And I did. And I love the fact that when I talk to a lot of high school kids, and they always say, man, how do you get to do what you do? You know, they always say Army bass anglers, how did being in the military, where you're at, what you do in the outdoor world, hunting, fishing, things like that. And I go, it goes back to the Army said, I took command of a company and went and commanded in Afghanistan. They came back and said, hey, it's a cabin crew course, said, hey, you got two choices. You can go to grad school full time, or you can go back to Afghanistan. Which one would you like to do? And I decided really, really quick that I did not want to go back to Afghanistan. I'd like to go to grad school full time. And it was very, very cool deal to get to be a part of this 20-year history. But I say this all the time because it was actually at an event that was being filmed by you guys. It was part of a qualifier for the championship that, you had a camera guy, Cody Prather, that actually stopped filming to tell me about Army bass anglers. And so I always say, man, if there hadn't been a guy that had the thought process by the name of Wade Middleton to put this thing together, that I would never got to go into grad school to be in a boat to have a conversation with a camera guy by the name of Cody Prather to tell me about a group called Army Bass Anglers. So
it's funny how that works, and it's been great. I mean, and the program where you went there, you helped vault it into national prominence, and it's still a strong program today.
Yeah.
But I think that starts because guys like you go into those programs, and then people in that area go, wow, we've got a bass team, and they gravitate to it, and it allows it to grow. And like I said, you never know where these littlest things like that can lead. And then here we are 20 years later, we're on your podcast. You're bringing, West Point grads to represent, get a run into you at a lot of trade shows.
Yeah.
And visit and talk industry stuff. That's the cool thing about this industry that I think is missing from, a lot of others. We all get to come together at different times and share ideas and watch the others grow, and you appreciate it. And it's not always a family, but it sure seems like it's a big family out there.
It does. I mean, that's really like, and we may only see each other like three, sometimes maybe two times, 3-4 times a year, but depending on who it is, but like, it's like you have this connection with them, and you're seeing them, and now thanks to like Facebook, we always get to watch each other, see how we're doing, families and things like that. And that's kind of cool, especially I know for you, probably you've been doing this for 20 years, getting to see all the ones that you've impacted over the years, to get to see them in just their personal lives. But it is a cool deal to be in this industry, to see how much they kind of support each other. Cause it's really weird. I know this, like, it's a strange thing, because you might have it to explain to people, competitors, but everybody talks to each other. It's so funny when we're at like a place like ICAST, like you never can tell, like you're going to talk, you're going to stop into somebody's booth that that works for a competitor, just because they're friends, man.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, you're going to stop in and say hi. That's everybody. Everybody. I mean, you guys, you may have worked with each other at one point or something, and it's so neat that how we're so connected at some point along the way. I mean, that's kind of the coolest thing in the process. I guess my question to you is, did you ever see yourself as being one of the people who would change, kind of shape how the fishing world was? I mean, I look at it because I say this because I got a couple of coins here on my military coins on in my office here, but like probably my most coveted coin is a Arkansas Game and Fish coin that Forrest Woods took out of his wallet and gave to me when I came back from Afghanistan.
Wow.
I mean, that's really, really special. And I got a couple of Hall of Fame coins that were given to me from the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame. So just been around, understanding the history, and like some of those guys who've shaped us along the way. I know you probably don't see it. And you're a very humble guy. I know that, just being around you, but Have you been able to kind of step back and see that, I asked you that question probably 2 years ago at the Legends of the Hall of Fame deal where you were kind of
Yeah.
inducted into that. Is it really kind of,
No, I mean, I still see room for opportunities to grow this and to do more. And, we're involved in a lot of other tournament trails that I still see opportunities out there and growth and stuff. But like I said, that few minutes that I step off to the side at takeoff every year at the championship is, that's an aha moment. And, but none of this has ever been possible without the whole team at Careco. There's always one guy that seems to get the most credit. And like Kevin says, if the plane crashes and we all go down, it's going to be Wade Middleton and camera guy. Well, Kevin's been to every one of these tournaments and filmed them, and his wife does a lot of things. So, so I don't really look at it like that, but at the end of the day, I'm just happy that as a team and our company has been able to get there. And I'm happy I've been able to maintain the energy to keep wanting to see this get better and better. 20 years in, we're still talking on the phone. This is a busy window leading up to that event in May, and trying to get all the little details done, because I still want that kid that finishes last to feel like it was worth every dime that they spent to get there for that weekend. And like we said about the safety deal, I've DQ'd a ton of kids at every one of these events because you have to. You've got to make it a learning deal. And I keep up with as many of them as I do anything else. Sometimes it's a penalty for 2 or 3 hours. I make them come carry boxes and stuff, lunch bags and things, hang banners. But, the whole process, it's awesome. And the only thing I don't, the only thing I regret in some ways, it's gotten so big. I don't know every kid the way I did back in the early years when you were fishing. I knew them all back then. Now there's so many of them that I've got so many people that are in touch with it more on a daily basis, like Kyle Curry.
Yeah.
He lives and sleeps this stuff now on a daily basis. And I check with him on some of these kids at different times because I don't know them all like I did. And I miss that personal part of it, but that's also part of life and part of the success. The event has grown so big. There's so many teams and so many kids. We went from 40, plus boats at the first one to, we'll have tournaments with 260 and 280 boats now.
Yeah. I know you've mentioned that to me. When we've talked, you said, the funny thing is most of those kids don't even sometimes know who you are because you've been around so long, and you're over there trying to just help in the bag line, and they're like, "Who's this old guy helping in the bag line?" Like telling me,
who's this grumpy guy telling him to put the stone in your bags, keep them fish alive. And
right.
Like, well, where did you retire from? A Walmart store greeter? Or?
Yeah. They don't even know who this guy is, and but that's the kind of
they weren't even born when we started this.
Yeah,
in reality, if you look at it.
I know, and when you and I watched you do it, so it's kind of funny, and I see that, but but that's very similar to like being in your military career. That's the whole time from being a platoon leader, company commander, and then you get into your field grade time, you lose that connection with being out there. And the same thing with the NCO side, you go from, being hands-on, you start getting up to being higher ranking, you lose that hands-on. And then that's the thing everybody says they miss, the most. And it's like,
it is.
I mean, that's why we always say, like, after company command is downhill, because you miss that hands-on piece of it. But it is. So, I mean, it is refreshing to see, I agree, like that idle out in the morning. For me, it's just, when we're at that event and I'm watching that blast off in the morning, for me, it's kind of a personal thing because I'm like sitting there and watching it, and I'm like, I look at it because I'm like, man, the fact that we get to go do this is just an amazing deal in the first place,
Uh-huh. Yep.
I mean, that's why I went and did what I did for 22 years, to watch a bunch of college kids get to go out and chase a little green fish around,
That's exactly right. People don't realize that the commitments and the time for all the service members have created these opportunities. You and I have been to a lot of countries where there is no opportunity to do that. and that's one of the country.
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the most refreshing deals to see that and to experience it along the way. And I think that's why, like, I really appreciate, like, the fact what you've always kind of done with West Point, and we'd offered to do that with the Naval Academy and the Air Force Academy if they could ever put a team together that want to be a part of it. It would be really cool to have that, to get all three of the academies there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that would be
awesome.
That would be awesome to have all three of the academies at the championship along the way. I think that would be really, really cool. I just think that's a cool piece. I know that it's a busy time of the year for you, so I won't keep you too long. I told you guys that we'd tell you a little bit about the Kentucky Derby, and we're here in Kentucky. Wait, you spend time here in Kentucky, don't you? You love coming here and going hunting.
I do.
Yeah, some good hunting here in Kentucky. But
absolutely.
So there's a couple of things we do really well here in Kentucky, and that's horse racing, and it's Kentucky Derby time. Well, you guys know my brother-in-law Kenny McPeak is the reigning Kentucky Oaks and Derby champion trainer, and he currently there's currently a Netflix series out there from last year from them doing all that just it came out a couple weeks ago, or a week ago, I guess it was, and it's really cool to watch your family member do that with my sister-in-law and everything like that. But you asked me, like, we were talking about this, Wade, and what's really cool, I told you I'd tell the listeners, like, what's the connection to fishing and all that is. So I'm going to tell you this, and you talked a little bit about this, when we see each other at these trade shows and stuff, it's kind of like family, right? Well, 2 years ago at ICAST, remember we had Toby Keith at ICAST?
Mm-hmm.
He bought a fishing tackle company, and everything we talk about that like it's a time we get to see family. And, well, of course, we had a little bit of time with Toby Keith, and he, most genuine person, for military that you ever get to meet. His favorite thing to talk to us about was his time he got to go spend in Afghanistan, in Iraq, at remote fire bases with a guitar, just sitting around playing with a couple guys on a mortar pit, right? That's what he loved to do. And so we just asked him on a whim that would he like to go to a network party with us? And so we took him, he said, sure. So we went and took him to the network party that night. And so we were there, and we wanted to, we were hanging out, and of course, you know this way, that everybody's got their badge on. It says where you're from and everything.
Yep.
And so it says Shepherdsville, Kentucky for my badge. So his son-in-law asked me, he said, how far is that from Lexington, Kentucky? And I said, well, it's about an hour and 15 minutes. And they said, oh, well, Toby goes there for the horse sales. And I said, oh, really? I said, do you know Kenny McPeak? And he goes, yeah. I said, well, that's my brother-in-law. He went, you're joking, right? I said, no. He said, you need to tell Toby that. And he said, come here. He said, Toby, he needs to tell you something. I said, well, he told me to tell you that Kenny McPeak was my brother-in-law. And it was like the white went out of his face. He goes, you're joking, right? And he said, Kenny was with me a couple of weeks ago at the horse sale and helped me pick out a horse. That's the horse that'll be running in the Kentucky Derby Saturday, rendering judgment. And for years and years, Toby had tried to get into the Kentucky Derby and never could. And he finally, since he's passed on, this horse will run Saturday as part of the Kentucky Derby. And
that's a great story.
Yeah. So we never know when we're at ICAST and those kind of things that will be there. One of the coolest things, he got up and sang like 10 or 15 songs. He was solely supposed to get up and sing one. We'd ask him to sing one song, and it was one of the last. He only performed publicly one other time after that before he passed away. But that horse, rendering judgment, is his horse, and trained by my brother-in-law Kenny McPeak, which will run in the Kentucky Derby on Saturday. So you never know what we're going to find at ICAST and how connected we are.
No, it's a small world.
It is such a small world. So I thought I would share that with the listeners, and just kind of Toby Keith has such a cool connection to the military and what he did with the USO tours and everything. And he kind of invigorated back into the fishing industry. I think at a time when it was kind of needing a little bit of invigoration as part of that,
Yeah.
So, but hey, Wade,
Great guy.
he's a great guy. I appreciate you spending a little bit of time with me on the podcast to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Collegiate Bass Fishing Championship. I know you guys are going to be there in Anderson, South Carolina. And ironically, that is actually where the Dalrymple name comes out of. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So that's where the heritage, basically resonates out of Anderson there, South Carolina. So I wish I was going to be there, but not going to get to make this one. But I appreciate everything you do, man, and I love the whole thing, and I'm very grateful to the opportunities that I got personally by being a part of it all those years ago. And I think that it'll continue to go on and do kind of some great things as part of it along the way. So
we appreciate everything that's happened for you, and you've been a big part of it too, and spreading the word, and enjoy your son's graduation. That's a big time. And like you said, on Facebook, I've been able to watch his escapades this year in football and all that. And that's, I wouldn't have followed that if you wouldn't have fished with us. So those are, like you said, the cool things there. And like I said, man, we appreciate it.
Well, hey, we appreciate it, guys. You want to know more about Army bass anglers, buck hunters, hog hunters, duck hunters, or redfish, go to forceonforcetv.com, and we'll see you next time. Cool.
Thanks for listening to the Force on Force podcast. Join us next time as we dive into more topics from the Force on Force Talk. For more information or to learn how to join the organization, visit our website at forceonforcetv.com.